The thunder of hooves broke the silence as Bartholomew Turner's funeral procession made its way through Copper Creek, leaving behind a widow whose sorrow seemed as vast as the Montana sky overhead. Beatrice Turner, 24 years old with eyes that had aged a decade in a week, watched the last of the mourners depart from her homestead, leaving her alone with a small farm, dwindling supplies, and the terrible weight of solitude in the unforgiving territory of 1876. "You'll manage just fine, Mrs. Turner," Sheriff Mills had assured her with a pat on her shoulder. "Folks around here look after their own." But 3 weeks later, as Beatrice stared at the empty flour barrel and the leaking roof that threatened to collapse with the next storm, she realized that neighborly concern had its limits in a land where survival demanded every ounce of a person's attention. Copper Creek had been built around the silver mines that gave the settlement its name and purpose. The main street consisted of a general store, a saloon that doubled as a hotel, a small church, and a handful of other establishments necessary for frontier life. Beyond the town's limits sprawled ranches and homesteads, including the modest Turner farm that Bartholomew had purchased with dreams bigger than his farming abilities. On a Tuesday morning with storm clouds gathering on the horizon, Beatrice hitched her wagon and headed into town with the last of her husband's pocket watch and wedding ring to trade for supplies. The thought of parting with these final reminders of Bart tore at her heart, but sentiment wouldn't feed her through winter. The general store bell jingled as she entered, and old man Whitaker looked up from his ledger. His face fell when he saw her the look of pity she'd grown to despise. "Mrs. Turner," he greeted, setting aside his pencil. "What can I do for you today?" "I need flour, coffee, and some nails to fix the roof," she said, placing the watch and ring on the counter. "Would these cover it?" They were Bart's. Whitaker picked up the items, examining them with a merchant's eye. "These are fine pieces, but what?" she asked, her throat tightening. "The watch might fetch enough for the flour and coffee, but not much else, and that roof of yours needs more than a few nails from what I hear." Beatrice swallowed hard. "What do you suggest, Mr. Whitaker?" The shopkeeper looked uncomfortable. "Well, there's always. I mean, a young woman like yourself shouldn't stay alone out there anyway. Marvin Baker's been widowed 2 years now, and he's mentioned—" "Thank you, but no," Beatrice interrupted firmly. "I'll take what the watch can buy." Whitaker sighed. "There might be another option. Knox Vance is looking for help at his ranch. Pays fair wages, I hear." Beatrice frowned. Everyone in Copper Creek knew of Knox Vance, the reclusive rancher who rarely came to town except for supplies and never stayed longer than necessary. His cattle operation was one of the largest in the territory, but the man himself was something of a mystery. "Mr. Vance doesn't strike me as the hiring type," she said cautiously. "Normally, no, but his foreman was in yesterday saying they need someone to cook and clean at the main house. Their last girl left to get married." Whitaker leaned closer. "It's honest work, Mrs. Turner, and better than selling off your memories piece by piece." Beatrice glanced down at Bart's ring still on the counter. The idea of working for a stranger, particularly one as notoriously private as Knox Vance, made her uneasy, but the leaking roof and empty pantry made a more persuasive argument. "Where would I find him?" she asked finally. "The Double V Ranch is about 5 miles north of your place." "Can't miss it, big white house sitting back from the road." Whitaker hesitated. "But Mrs. Turner, folks say Knox Vance isn't the easiest man to work for. Been alone too long, some say. Heart turned to stone after his family died in that fire years back. I'm not looking for easy, Mr. Whitaker. Just a way to keep my home." She collected her husband's ring and slipped it back onto her finger. "I'll take the flour and coffee now, please." The following morning, Beatrice set out for the Double V Ranch with a determination that belied her uncertainty. The journey took nearly 2 hours, with her old mare pulling the wagon over the rutted trail. When the ranch house came into view, she understood why people spoke of Knox Vance with a mixture of respect and wariness. The Double V was impressive by any standard, a sprawling operation with several outbuildings, corrals filled with quality horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding hills. The main house stood apart, a two-story structure built of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. It spoke of prosperity but not ostentation, much like the territory itself. As Beatrice pulled her wagon to a halt, a tall man emerged from the barn. He approached with the confident stride of someone comfortable in his domain, wiping his hands on a rag. He wore no gun that she could see unusual in these parts, but carried himself with the quiet assurance of someone who didn't need one to command respect. "You're trespassing," he said without preamble, his voice deep and rough as if seldom used. Beatrice straightened her spine. "Are you Mr. Vance?" He studied her with eyes the color of winter sky. "I am. I'm Beatrice Turner. Mr. Whitaker mentioned you're looking for help with cooking and housekeeping." Recognition flickered across his face. "Turner, the widow from South Creek," she nodded, refusing to be diminished by the label. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Vance. I kept house for my father before I married, and I can cook well enough to satisfy hungry men." Knox Vance said nothing for a long moment, just examined her with an intensity that made her want to fidget. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair streaked prematurely with silver at the temples. His face might have been handsome once, before time and hardship had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. "It's not charity I'm offering," he said finally. "It's work. Long hours, 6 days a week. You'd stay in the small room off the kitchen. Sundays are your own." "I understand," she replied. "And I don't want charity. $5 a week plus room and board." The sum was generous, more than she'd expected, enough to buy supplies and save toward repairing her farm. "When would you like me to start?" she asked. "Now, if you're willing." He gestured toward the house. "My men will be expecting dinner in a few hours." Beatrice glanced back at her wagon. "I should return home first to collect my things. Send one of my hands later. We're burning daylight." And just like that, Beatrice found herself following Knox Vance into his home, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake or found salvation. The interior of the ranch house surprised her. She'd expected bachelor simplicity, perhaps even neglect. Instead, she found order and unexpected touches of refinement, solid furniture, shelves lined with books, even a piano in the corner of the sitting room. But there was also a layer of dust on every surface and a neglected quality to the space, as if its owner saw it as merely functional rather than a home. "Kitchen's through there," Knox said, pointing down a hallway. "Pantry's well stocked. Your room's the door on the right. There are 8 men working this ranch, including me. They eat at dawn, noon, and dusk. Do you have preferences for meals?" she asked, already mentally inventorying what she might prepare. "No." His answer was curt. "As long as it's filling and on time." Knox showed her the rest of the downstairs with minimal commentary: dining room, study, sitting room, then pointed up the stairs. "My quarters are up there. You don't need to go up unless I specifically ask for cleaning. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mr. Vance," he nodded once. "I'll be in the south pasture until sundown. The men will show up for dinner without calling." And then he was gone, leaving Beatrice alone in the silent house. She exhaled slowly, then rolled up her sleeves. Whatever Knox Vance's reputation, whatever his past, he was now her employer. And she intended to earn every cent of the $5 he'd promised. The kitchen was well appointed, but showed signs of bachelor cooking: burnt spots on the stovetop, a sink full of unwashed dishes, and utensils scattered without organization. Beatrice spent the first hour simply creating order from chaos, then began preparing a hearty stew with the beef and vegetables she found in the pantry. By the time the ranch hands began filing in for dinner, she had the table set and fresh bread cooling on the counter. The men were initially awkward around her, a woman's presence clearly a novelty in this household, but soon relaxed when they realized the quality of food that awaited them. They introduced themselves between enthusiastic bites. Miguel, the foreman who'd mentioned the job in town, brothers Tim and Thomas who handled the horses, Joseph, an older man who'd been with the ranch since its beginning, and three younger hands, Will, Charlie, and Daniel, who seemed barely out of boyhood. "Boss joining us?" Miguel asked, glancing toward the door. Joseph shook his head. "Knox don't take meals with the crew, never has." "Does he eat at all?" Beatrice asked before she could stop herself. The men exchanged glances and Joseph answered carefully. "He'll come in after we're done." "Always been that way, madam. Nothing personal to you." After the men had eaten their fill and returned to their bunkhouse with effusive thanks, Beatrice set aside a plate and covered it to keep warm. She cleaned the kitchen, put away the leftover food, and was about to retire to her room when the back door opened and Knox entered. He paused when he saw her. "You're still up." "I saved you dinner," she said, gesturing to the covered plate. "Would you like coffee?" He seemed momentarily thrown by the consideration. "No, thank you." Beatrice nodded and moved toward her room. "Good night then, Mr. Vance." "Mrs. Turner," he called as she reached her door. She turned back to find him still standing in the same spot, an unreadable expression on his face. The biscuits were good. It wasn't much as compliments went, but something in his tone suggested it was more than he usually offered. "Thank you, I'll make more tomorrow." The days fell into a rhythm after that. Beatrice rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men, spent her mornings cleaning the house, her afternoons baking and preparing dinner, and her evenings darning, mending, and occasionally reading from the impressive library in Knox's sitting room. The work was hard but satisfying, and the regular meals and comfortable bed were luxuries she hadn't enjoyed since Bart fell ill. Knox remained as elusive as his reputation suggested. He ate alone, spoke little when their paths crossed, and spent most daylight hours working alongside his men. But Beatrice began to notice things about him that didn't match the cold-hearted recluse of town gossip. He was unfailingly polite, removing his hat whenever he entered a room where she was present. He never raised his voice, even when one of the younger hands lost control of a prize stallion that destroyed an entire section of fencing. And though he kept his distance from everyone, she occasionally caught him watching the easy camaraderie of his men with something like longing in his eyes. On her third Sunday at the ranch, Beatrice asked Miguel if he would drive her to her homestead to check on things. When they arrived, she found the roof had partially collapsed during the recent rains, soaking what few possessions she'd left behind. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Turner," Miguel said, surveying the damage. "But fixing this would take more money than it's worth, if you don't mind my saying." Beatrice fought back tears as she gathered the few salvageable items: her mother's quilt, Bart's shaving kit, a small chest containing letters and photographs. Everything else was ruined. When they returned to the ranch, Knox was waiting on the porch. His eyes took in her tear-stained face and the meager possessions in her arms. "Miguel told me about your roof," he said. "I'm sorry." "It's just a house," she replied, though they both knew it was a lie. That evening, she found a small wooden box outside her bedroom door. Inside was a collection of sewing supplies: needles, thread, scissors, and fine fabrics that must have cost a small fortune in this remote territory. No note accompanied the gift, but she didn't need one to know who had left it. The following week brought the first real autumn storm, with driving rain that kept everyone indoors. Beatrice used the opportunity to give the house a thorough cleaning, including the rarely used formal dining room. It was there, while dusting a high shelf, that she discovered a small leather-bound Bible tucked behind a decorative plate. The book fell open naturally to Psalm 127, the page worn thin from repeated handling. "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward." The margins were filled with a man's precise handwriting prayers, it seemed. Prayers for a family, for children, for healing. The dates spanned years, the latest entry just months old. "What are you doing?" Beatrice startled and nearly dropped the Bible. Knox stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. I was cleaning and found that's private. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took the Bible from her hands. His fingers trembled slightly as he closed it. I didn't mean to pry, she said softly. It just fell open. Knox's jaw tightened. There are some things a man keeps to himself, Mrs. Turner. Of course. She hesitated, then added, but sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter. Is that what you did when your husband died? Shared your burden? His tone was cutting. No, she admitted. I carried it alone, and it nearly crushed me. Something shifted in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of a shared pain. But the moment passed, and he tucked the Bible into his shirt pocket. Dinner at the usual time? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, Mr. Vance. He nodded and left her standing alone in the dining room, wondering about the man who prayed for a family in secret while keeping everyone at arm's length. That night, Beatrice couldn't sleep. The image of Knox's handwriting filling the margins of his Bible haunted her. The dates showed years of faithful prayer, including recent entries. Whatever tragedy had befallen him in the past, he was still a man of faith. Still a man with hopes, however deeply buried. The next morning, she found him alone in the kitchen before the other men arrived for breakfast. He acknowledged her with a nod and continued drinking his coffee. Mr. Vance, she said, gathering her courage, I want to apologize again for yesterday. It's forgotten, he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. May I ask you something? He looked wary but nodded. Everyone in town says you're not interested in rebuilding your life after what happened to your family, that you've closed yourself off. But that's not what I saw in your Bible. Knox set down his cup with careful precision. People talk too much about things they don't understand. Then help me understand, she pressed gently, because the man who writes those prayers isn't someone who's given up on life. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed deeply, the sound of a man releasing a breath held too long. My wife and daughter died in a house fire 6 years ago, he said, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear him. I was in town on business, should have been home. Might have saved them. I'm so sorry, Beatrice whispered. I started writing in that Bible the night of their funeral, angry at first, demanding answers. Later, he stared into his coffee. Later, I just asked for peace, and somewhere along the way I started asking for another chance. Foolish, probably. It's not foolish to want a family, she said, to want love. Knox met her gaze directly for perhaps the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch. Isn't it? Everyone else seems to think so. Sheriff Mills made it clear when he tried to match me with his sister last year. Said I wasn't ready, might never be. And what do you think? He stood abruptly. I think we've had enough conversation for one morning, Mrs. Turner. The men will be hungry. 3 days later, Beatrice was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the corral. She rushed to the fence in time to see Knox thrown from a bucking horse, landing hard against the wooden rails. The men converged quickly, helping him to his feet despite his protests. I'm fine, he insisted, though he was clearly favoring his right side. Boss, that was a bad fall, Miguel argued. Let Mrs. Turner take a look. Knox's eyes found Beatrice watching from the fence. Something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they were no longer merely employer and employee. Fine, he conceded, but I'm walking to the house myself. Beatrice hurried ahead to prepare hot water and bandages. By the time Knox entered the kitchen, his face was pale with pain. Sit, she instructed, pointing to a chair, and remove your shirt. He raised an eyebrow at her authoritative tone but complied with wincing movements. The right side of his torso was already blooming with an angry bruise. You might have broken ribs, she said, gently probing the area. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, the muscles taut. Does this hurt? Yes, he admitted through gritted teeth. Breathe in deeply. He tried and immediately gasped in pain. Definitely bruised ribs, possibly broken. You'll need to rest for a few days. Knox shook his head. The North herd needs moving before the weather turns. Miguel can handle it, she countered, wrapping a long bandage around his torso to stabilize the injury. You're no good to this ranch if you puncture a lung being stubborn. To her surprise, a small smile touched his lips. "You sound like my mother. Was she a wise woman, the wisest?" The smile faded. "She would have liked you." Beatrice felt a flush rise to her cheeks and focused on securing the bandage. "There, you should lie down. I'll bring you some willow bark tea for the pain." For the next 3 days, Knox was confined to the house under Beatrice's watchful care. Initially restless and irritable, he gradually relaxed into the forced rest. They developed a new routine breakfast together in the kitchen, then Knox would read in the sitting room while Beatrice went about her chores. In the afternoons, they would play chess or simply talk. She learned that he had come west after the war, buying land when it was still cheap and building his ranch from nothing. He spoke of his late wife, Catherine, with tender reverence, and of his daughter, Emma, who had been 4 when she died. In turn, Beatrice told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her brief marriage to Bart, and her dreams of someday having children of her own. "Bart and I tried," she confessed one evening as they sat before the fire. "But it never happened. Then he got sick and—" She shrugged. "Some dreams have to wait, I suppose." Knox was quiet for a long moment. "The waiting is the hardest part. Is that why you pray?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider. His eyes met hers across the dimly lit room. "I pray because it's all I know how to do. All these years, all the wealth this ranch has brought me, none of it matters without someone to share it with. But I don't know how to begin again." "Perhaps you already have," she said softly. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Knox's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heartbeat, Beatrice thought he might cross the room to her. Instead, he stood and moved to the window. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rough. "You should rest." The following Sunday, Knox surprised Beatrice by asking if she would accompany him to church in town. It would be her first return to Copper Creek since taking the job at the ranch, and she felt unexpectedly nervous about being seen with him. "People will talk," she warned as they rode in his wagon. "People always talk," he replied with a hint of amusement. "Does it bother you?" She considered the question. "No, but I'm surprised it doesn't bother you, given how private you are." Knox glanced at her, his eyes unreadable. "Maybe I'm tired of privacy." The small church was nearly full when they arrived, and their entrance caused a ripple of whispers to spread through the congregation. Sheriff Mills raised his eyebrows, and Mr. Whitaker gave Beatrice a knowing smile that made her blush. After the service, several townspeople approached to greet them, curiosity barely disguised as politeness. Knox handled the attention with surprising grace, keeping Beatrice close to his side with a light hand at her elbow. "Mrs. Turner, you're looking well, Mrs." Whitaker said, eyes darting between Beatrice and Knox. "Ranch life must agree with you." "It does," Beatrice replied simply. "Mr. Vance," Sheriff Mills said, extending his hand, "don't often see you at Sunday service." Knox shook the offered hand. "I've been remiss in my duties to the community, Sheriff. Mrs. Turner reminded me of that." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. As they approached the house, Knox finally broke the silence. "I heard what they were saying," he said, "about us." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "People with empty lives fill them by speculating about others." "Is it merely speculation?" Knox's voice was carefully neutral. She turned to look at him, this man who had moved from employer to friend to something more in the span of weeks. "What do you think, Mr. Vance?" "I think," he said slowly, "that you should call me Knox." That evening, after the men had eaten and retired to the bunkhouse, Knox asked Beatrice to join him on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small envelope and handed it to her. Inside, Beatrice found a deed to her homestead. But the name on the document had been changed from Bartholomew Turner to Beatrice Turner. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at him. "I bought your land from the bank. They were going to claim it for back taxes." Knox's expression was earnest. "The deed is yours now, free and clear. You can return whenever you wish." Beatrice stared at the paper in her hands, emotions warring within her. You think I want to leave? I think you deserve the choice. He took a deep breath. I've grown accustomed to your presence here, Beatrice, more than accustomed, but I won't keep you out of obligation. Is that what you think? That I stay out of obligation? Knox's eyes reflected the starlight. Why do you stay? The question hung between them, fraught with possibility. Beatrice carefully folded the deed and placed it in her pocket. Then she moved closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. Because somewhere between the first meal I cooked in your kitchen and this moment, I found something I thought I'd lost forever. She placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken beneath her palm. Hope. Knox covered her hand with his own. Everyone in town says I'm not ready, that I've been alone too long. Everyone in town is wrong, she whispered when he kissed her. It felt like coming home after a long journey. His lips were gentle at first, questioning, then more insistent as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as if he feared she might disappear. I've wanted to do that since you stood in my kitchen and told me I was being stubborn about my ribs, he confessed when they finally parted. Beatrice laughed softly. I've wanted you to do that since I found your Bible and realized you were nothing like the man everyone described. Knox's expression grew serious. I'm still that man in many ways, Beatrice, scarred, cautious. I don't know if I can be what you need. What I need, she said, touching his face, is someone who understands loss but hasn't surrendered to it. Someone who still prays for a family even when it seems impossible. He rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered, not as my housekeeper, stay as. As what? She prompted when he hesitated. Knox pulled back slightly to meet her gaze. As my wife, if you'll have me. Beatrice's heart soared at the unexpected proposal. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. He took her hands in his. I thought God had forgotten my prayers, but then he sent you to my door. You brought life back into this house, Beatrice. Into me. Tears blurred her vision. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church of Copper Creek with the entire town in attendance. Sheriff Mills offered his congratulations with genuine warmth, admitting he'd been wrong about Knox's readiness for love. Mr. Whitaker beamed like a matchmaker whose scheme had succeeded beyond expectation. After the ceremony, Knox surprised Beatrice by taking her not to the ranch but to her old homestead. As they approached, she gasped at the transformation. The roof had been repaired, the exterior freshly painted, and a new porch added to the front. Knox, what have you done? He helped her down from the wagon, his eyes bright with excitement. I thought we might use it as a summer home, or perhaps someday when we have children who are old enough, they might want their own piece of land to start out. Children. She repeated, her heart filling with joy at his certainty. Knox pulled her into his arms. I've been praying for a family for 6 years, Beatrice. God answered by sending me you. I have faith he'll answer the rest in time. As the sun set over the Montana hills, casting long shadows across their joined properties, Beatrice stood in her husband's embrace and felt the last pieces of her broken heart mend themselves. Together, they had found what neither believed possible again, a second chance at love, and the promise of the family they both had prayed for. 1 year later, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and crimsons, Beatrice sat on the porch of the ranch house with her infant daughter cradled in her arms. The baby, whom they had named Hope, had her father's eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Knox joined them, placing a gentle kiss on his wife's forehead before bending to admire their daughter's sleeping face. She's perfect, he whispered. Yes, she is, Beatrice agreed. And so is this life we've built. Knox reached into his pocket and withdrew the worn Bible that had first revealed his heart to her. Opening to Psalm 127, he showed her a new entry in the margin, a prayer of thanksgiving, dated the day of Hope's birth. Everyone said I wasn't ready, he murmured, but God knew better. Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder as they watched the sun sink below the horizon, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, living proof that prayers, Even those written in the margins of a worn Bible are sometimes answered in the most unexpected and beautiful ways.